Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fulfilling Work, Meaningful Life. I'm your host, Anthony Craiker, and this week we'll be talking about 5 ways to embrace change. But before we get into the topic today, I wanted to just remind you about the free resource that I have for you. If you go to my website, fulfillingworkmeaningfullife.com, and you put in your email address to subscribe to my monthly newsletter, I will send you a free download of a 14-day reflection journal for finding or creating fulfilling work. And this tool is designed to help you start taking action towards finding or creating a job that will be fulfilling to you, that will be meaningful, and that will help you to reach the financial goals that you've made. Each day of the 14 days has questions that you'll respond to in a journal format. And then at the end of the questions, there are specific action items that you'll take that day to get you moving along the path towards finding or creating fulfilling work. So check that out. Again, that's fulfillingworkmeaningfullife.com, and it's a free 14-day reflection journal for finding or creating fulfilling work. And all you've got to do is go to the website, put in your email address, and I'll send that free download to you. All right, so today we're going to be talking about 5 ways to embrace change. Benjamin Franklin once wrote, quote, "In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." Now, while those two things are certain, we're all going to kick the bucket one day, and boy, do we have to pay taxes. There's also another certainty in life, and that certainty is change. Change is inevitable. To some degree, our lives are constantly changing as we get older and watch our kids or our grandkids get older. And it seems the older I get, the faster time goes by. I'm sure that most of you, like me, have had several significant changes in your lives. Perhaps you've lost a spouse or significant other or even a child. Perhaps you've been hit out of the blue with a serious health issue. Maybe you've suffered a job loss or even job losses. Maybe you've gone through a divorce, or perhaps a child leaving home and going off to college was a much bigger adjustment than you anticipated. I could go on, but I think you get the point. Change is going to happen, and it's going to happen over and over again throughout our lives. And quite frankly, sometimes change just sucks. On the flip side, however, change isn't always bad. Sometimes change can be new and exciting. Maybe you get a better job, make a new friend, find a new love, buy a new house, or just get a new hairstyle that you really like. As much as change can be difficult, it can also be fun and even joyful. But change can also be scary. Many years ago, our family was living in Oklahoma. I had recently graduated law school and was working for a company that paid relatively well and had really good benefits. The only problem was I was absolutely miserable in that job. Sometimes I would come home and feel so depressed about the job that all I wanted to do was sit and watch TV until it was time for bed. I felt dejected when I woke up in the mornings and drove to work, thinking about how intolerable my day was going to be the entire drive. But I had a young family and wanted to take care of them, and this job felt stable. About a year into that job, a buddy from law school contacted me and asked if I'd be interested in working for a national law firm handling Social Security disability cases. Now, I didn't know anything about disability law, but I was so desperate to get out of the job I was in, I said sure, and sent him my resume to pass on to his boss. A couple of months later, I got a phone call asking if I'd like to interview. The firm was based in Utah, so it would be a phone interview, but the job that they were trying to fill was in Florida. The interview went really well, and I came home that night and told my wife that I felt like I was going to get offered the job and that we needed to seriously think about whether we wanted to move from Oklahoma to Florida. We decided that we would. Within a couple of days, the job offer came and I accepted the position, even though it would be slightly less money than I was making in my current position, at least for the first year or two. And then, as reality began to set in, it hit me that this was the biggest change our young family would experience up until that point in our lives. I worried about whether I was doing the right thing. We had family close to us in both Oklahoma and Texas. Florida seemed to be a very long way away. What if we got out there and the job didn't work out for some reason? I started getting scared, but my wife assured me that she was on board and that she had confidence in my ability to succeed in this new endeavor. Now, that decision to move to Florida ended up being the best decision we could have possibly made. I'm still with that same firm, but I'm now in a senior managing attorney role. We ended up moving to a great area in Central Florida. We have loved our time here. It's been a great place to raise our family. Oh, and that job that I hated, that I thought was stable, that company took a nosedive, and the entire division that I worked in was laid off just a few years after we moved to Florida. So while change can be really scary sometimes, oftentimes it is exactly what we need. And sometimes change is just change. Some changes in circumstances aren't necessarily good or bad. They're just things that happen with minimal effect on our day-to-day lives. But regardless of whether we perceive a change in our life as good, bad, scary, or of little significance, one thing is certain. Just like death and taxes, change is something we will all experience. So, what are we going to do about it? Well, we really only have two choices. We can either let it define us or we can define it. Said another way, change will either embrace us or we can choose to embrace change. The latter is often easier said than done, I admit, but today I'm going to share 5 practical ways that I've learned to embrace change and not let it be something that dictates my mindset or my ability to experience meaning and joy in life. Now, some of these 5 ways are just common sense, and some of you may already be doing them without even realizing it. Regardless, I think there is value in pointing them out and thinking through them because that process helps us to be proactive in the way that we respond to change. But before I share these ideas, one caveat. When something traumatic happens to you, don't expect yourself to bounce back immediately. Give yourself an appropriate window of time to process the change. The window could be as short as binging Netflix for a day or two right after a job loss, or it could be longer, like taking several months to a year to make any major decisions, such as after a spouse or significant other passes away. You get to be the judge of what's appropriate. But all that being said, don't let that time go on indefinitely. And if you find yourself falling into depression or struggling with mental health, talk to a professional. Life is too short to spend it wasting away. But sometimes it's okay to take a brief window of time in order to just kind of recharge, process what's happened, and take a little break from reality. Okay, now on to the 5 ways to embrace change. Number 1, ask yourself what the change you are facing makes possible in your life. I learned this principle from Dan Miller, who I talked about in last week's episode. And Dan, as you probably know, was the author of 48 Days to the Work You Love, several other books. He was a popular speaker and coach and host of the 48 Days to the Work You Love podcast. And he recently passed away about a year ago. And as I mentioned last week, I never got to meet Dan personally, but he was an important influence in my life. And Dan was famous for asking this question: what does this make possible? So this question, this idea of asking yourself what the change you're facing makes possible in your life, is all about flipping the script. Instead of viewing change as a loss, choose to see your change as an opportunity. What new doors does this change open for you? In the 2009 film Up in the Air, George Clooney plays a traveling corporate downsizer who works for this HR consultancy firm. And basically, the premise is that other companies hire his company to come in and do layoffs for them. So Clooney's character travels all around the country, goes into these corporate environments, and lays people off. In one poignant scene, he lays off this character named Bob, who is quite upset about losing his job. At one point, Clooney's character asks Bob, "How much did they first pay you to give up on your dream?" To which Bob sighs and reluctantly responds, 27 grand a year. Clooney's character then asks Bob, "And when were you going to stop and do what makes you happy?" Bob doesn't have an answer. And then Clooney's character says that he sees guys like Bob all the time who work at the same company their entire lives, and that they just clock in and clock out and they never have a moment of happiness. Clooney then tells Bob that he has an opportunity to chase his dream, and that this layoff, this horrible thing that's just happened in his life, is actually a rebirth. Now, I don't mean to minimize the pain that people feel when they lose their job, but the reality is that we really have no control over that kind of thing. And we have no control over much of the stuff, many of the things that happen to us in our lives. So we can either wallow in our misery, or we can ask ourselves what the change that we are facing makes possible for us, and then go out and proactively strive to realize those possibilities. A few years ago, my oldest child, Bella, left for college, and I was an emotional mess. I was not ready for my baby girl to leave home, even though I knew it had been coming for some time. But I also knew that she was prepared and she was ready, and that going to college would be a great experience for her. I had several tearful nights leading up to the day when we would say our goodbyes. And when that moment finally came, I couldn't stop crying. I hugged her as if it was the last time I would ever hug her again. I was so proud of who she had become, but I was also so sad that my life would be changing so dramatically. Eventually, it got easier as I adjusted to life without her living at home. Now, my middle child, my daughter Natalie, has gone off to college, and I miss her just as much as I miss Bella. But this time, when I said goodbye, it felt a little easier. And our youngest, my son Ethan, only has a year and a half or so left of high school. So change is happening in my life, and change continues to come in my life. But my wife and I are now asking ourselves, what does this make possible? We're asking where we want to live and what we want to do with our lives once we're quote unquote empty nesters. So while change can be hard, and make no mistake about it, there will be plenty more tears shed in our house as we get ready to say goodbye to our youngest child, it's also exciting. Asking ourselves what the changes in our lives make possible has this way of kind of opening our eyes to new possibilities and helping us feel optimistic about the future. So as you face change, ask yourself, what does this change make possible for me? Number 2, do work. Now, I don't necessarily mean your job. I'm talking about doing any kind of work, whether that's a home project, taking care of your lawn, helping out with a service project in your community, or anything really that requires you to be doing something. College and NFL coach Jim Harbaugh has said that work clears the mind, cleanses the soul, and a lot of times you get the clarity you need. His point is that when we go to work, whether that's on a personal thing, a hobby, or anything else that gets us using our mind and our body, it's a lot easier to face change and deal with adversity because we are responding to our situation rather than letting our circumstances dictate how we live our lives. Number 3, cultivate a learning mentality. Those of us who view life as a teacher that helps us learn and grow as human beings are more likely to view change as an opportunity for learning, whether that's learning about yourself, learning about faith, learning new skills or abilities. When learning becomes part of who you are, change will inevitably become an opportunity for growth in all aspects of your life. So use your life experiences, including the changes that come into your life, as catalysts for learning. I have found that life will become much more meaningful if you do that. Number 4, surround yourself with encouraging people. Now, this may seem like a no-brainer, but I see people who get sucked into this vortex of negativity and cynicism all the time. Today's culture is big on validation and empathy, but those seemingly good qualities can also be a double-edged sword if we're not careful. I constantly see people posting on social media about their problems and others cheering on their pessimism, thinking that they're being good friends, good listeners. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with validation or empathy in and of themselves. They can be very powerful tools as we interact with other people. But if the people around you are feeding negativity and prohibiting a growth mindset instead of building you up and encouraging you, then seek out new people to surround yourself with and limit the influence that cynical or negative people have on your thoughts and in your life. I promise you, you'll be much happier if you do. And change will bring new meaning and purpose to your life if you do that. All right, number 5, the last one, increase your resilience. So the American Psychological Association defines resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stressors. The APA also says that there are things that we can actually do to build our resilience so that we're ready when that change inevitably hits us. We can build our connections and prioritize our relationships. We can foster wellness by taking care of our bodies, practicing mindfulness, and avoiding substances that merely mask our pain. We can find purpose by helping others, being proactive and working toward goals and personal growth. And we can embrace healthy thoughts by keeping things in perspective and maintaining a hopeful and optimistic outlook. We can also build our resilience by seeking professional help when necessary. So those are some practical steps each of us can do to build our resilience in everyday life, which in turn is going to help us embrace the changes that we face. All right, so just to sum up, the 5 ways to embrace change are: ask yourself what the change you're facing makes possible for you, do work, cultivate a learning mentality, surround yourself with encouraging people, and increase your resilience. Well, I hope you find these ideas helpful. If you've found other ways to embrace change, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me by sending me a DM on social media. As I've mentioned, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X. I also have a YouTube channel where I'll be sharing some related content on this topic of embracing change. So you can check that out. Feel free to comment on the YouTube channel, or you can send me an email. If you go to the website that I mentioned earlier, fulfillingworkmeaningfullife.com, there's a section on the website where you can ask me a question or send me a comment or share with me. I'd love to hear from you about how you deal with change in your life and how that has helped your life become more meaningful. You can also check out the show notes for today's episode for links to the clip of the George Clooney scene that I mentioned from that movie Up in the Air, as well as the Jim Harbaugh quote that I shared and the article from the American Psychological Association that I mentioned. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and let's make it a meaningful week.